Same old man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for August 6th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Happy birthday to me.
You beat me to the punch. I was going to
president.
say it. I was going to say it. Happy birthday, JD.
Thank you. This is the best birthday gift I could give myself.
And that Shyamalan movies.
Releasing our trap conversation to the world. I hope everyone enjoys it, as I'm sure we are going to here shortly.
It's a great birthday gift when he comes out with a new film, isn't it?
I am really grateful. And you know what? I've never realized that M. Night Shyamalan's birthday is very close to mine.
Yeah, it's not
I never
far off.
realized that we were that close.
Yeah.
And what a gift he gave me with Trap. I am so thankful that he was able to gift me with that movie.
We're playing our cards a little bit early, aren't we? Well, for those who listen to episode 596 in full, you probably already know how we feel about Trap.
Yeah, I've also been pretty vocal about it on social media. I think people know what they're getting into with this conversation. At least most of you listening might have an idea of where this is going to go.
Yeah.
But yes, we did briefly talk about it on episode 596 as well, as we did our M. Night ranking, and that was a lot of fun. We've already had some good positive feedback about that episode. So
good.
Appreciate those that have already dove in and listened to that episode and reached out to us.
Yeah.
It was a really, really fun conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe we can, because that was a consensus ranking, we can update our own personal rankings at the end of this conversation on Trap.
Yeah, that is so hard. I think I talked about this on episode 596. My Shyamalan ranking changes pretty much by the hour, if I'm being honest. It really depends on what's top of mind at that particular moment.
Yeah, I will say, and I'm with you, this like my M. Night ranking also can change from moment to moment. Trap is interesting because where I have it right now, I feel pretty good that it's going to sit firmly where it's at for the time being.
Sure.
However, in the next couple of years, I think that's where I'm going to be wrestling with how much higher it's gone in the ranking. I could see it climbing the ranks as time goes on. The more I see it, the more we talk about it. I'm curious what that conversation is going to be like in a few years.
I feel like I've said that very same thing for most of M. Night's recent films. I feel like I'm going to like them more as time goes on. I especially think that's true for Knock at the Cabin, which I do like more since I saw it last year. I'm unsure about Split and Old. Those are movies I need to revisit once again to see how well they hold up. Those are still kind of in the periphery for me. But I'm with you. I think Trap is another one of those that I might like more as I continue to sit with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I am very excited to dive into it. Before we do, though, I want to quickly talk about my experience going to the theater to see this. Okay. And forgive me, this is a little bit of a rabbit hole that does take us slightly away from Trap itself, but it was the experience of going to the theater to see this movie.
Sure.
I will say first, it's always surreal to me, an honor. I love it when our writers get featured in marketing materials.
Oh, I love this. Yeah.
Great to see that. Recently, we had a review from Serena Segadoni. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, Serena, please forgive me. But this was a review that came out in February for the neon film Cuckoo. And it was recently featured on the new trailer for Cuckoo.
Yeah.
That played in front of Trap. And like everyone else, you see the trailer online, you react to it. It's very cool. I was excited for Serena.
Yeah.
again, always thrilled for our writers when things like that happen.
Yeah, for sure.
However, I've never experienced seeing it in the theater the way I did before Trap.
Oh man, I'm
I
so
think I've
envious.
seen one before in the theater, but it was me and maybe one other person.
But
However,
with a full audience, yeah.
I went to see Trap with a completely full audience. It was booked. Every seat was taken.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that.
And I did not anticipate that they were going to play the Cuckoo trailer in front of Trap. I didn't realize that's what was going to happen. However, I'm sitting there. Again, it's completely full, even during the trailers. And I see the trailer come on and I see the quote pop up. And I very much did the Leo pointing the finger thing at the TV.
You did the
Like,
Rick Dalton thing.
I
You did
was
the Rick
like,
Dalton thing, of
oh
course.
my God. There we are. Like it hit differently knowing that there was a massive audience there to see our name up there on the screen.
Did you get a
it was
reaction from
really
anyone
fun.
sitting? Did you get a reaction from anyone sitting around
No,
you?
because it happened so fast that I don't think anyone realized. And I'm sitting there by myself. I didn't go with anyone. So it wasn't as if I was able to engage or talk to anybody about it. However, it was one of those things where my wife said if she was there, she would have like vocally said something out loud about it.
That's my husband.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though it's not your review, it's still your site in many ways.
Yeah,
So,
no, it's exciting to see our name up there. Yeah, it has
I
nothing
love
to do
that.
with me, but just our team getting recognized in that way. Again, always excited for our writers when they're featured like that. And
Yeah.
I just had never experienced that and with a full crowd the way I did.
I love that story, but I also hate that story because I did not get the Cuckoo trailer before my screening.
Oh,
No,
wow.
I did not get that. So I didn't get to have that experience. And I don't always show up on time for movies given how long movie trailers
Oh,
and then, commercials before the trailers are these days. But for Trap, I did get there on time and I didn't miss anything. And for some reason, they didn't play that trailer in front of
Oh man,
in front of my
that's
screening.
unfortunate.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
didn't get to have the Rick Dalton moment that you did.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else out there listening saw that trailer. If they got that, I don't know.
wonder.
Maybe I was just really lucky. I have no idea.
Yeah, apparently they
But
knew you were going to be at that screen.
They do, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Play that
yeah.
one in this
Folks at
particular
Neon.
theater.
It's like,
Yeah,
oh, JD Duran's going to be at this one. Let's play the Cuckoo trailer. Just for him.
exactly.
Just for him.
Yeah, it was pretty surreal.
That's amazing.
Pretty cool
man.
moment.
Yeah.
And it set the foundation very well for Trap because it was a fun little moment and I was in a good mood and M. Night did not do anything to dissipate.
So
that
it set the stage for a
set the
fun little
stage.
movie.
Exactly. All right, let's get into it. M. Night Shyamalan. He's back with Trap. I loved Knock at the Cabin last year. If anyone missed that review, you can go and check that out. We talked about it, of course, on the main show this last week. So, man, he's been on a roll as far as I am concerned.
He's so
Mr. M. Night.
interesting. He's so
So
interesting.
interesting. The trailers for Trap I thought were very intriguing. So let's go ahead and get into it. M. Night Shyamalan, of course, wrote and directed this film. And it stars the great Josh Hartnett. Oh my gosh, it was great to see him in a leading role. Once again, it's been such a long time. He's popped up in a bunch of movies really recently in these supporting roles.
Yeah.
But to see him leading a movie like this, it's been quite a while. So
Is this
that
the
was very exciting.
First time since maybe 30 Days of Night in 2007 that he's actually leading a major film like this?
Yeah, I'd have to go. I don't have his filmography in front of me.
Yeah,
right now,
I'd have to
but-
fact check myself on that one too, but it
but
feels
maybe,
like it could
yeah.
have been that long.
It certainly feels like that's the case.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
you're right. He has popped up on a few occasions. I think the credit really has to go to Guy Ritchie. more than anyone else.
Yeah,
For
yeah, because he
really
came back in one of his recent films.
Yeah, it was Wrath of Man where he really capitalized on how good Josh
Yeah,
Hartnett is. And
yeah,
as I understand, I think Josh Hartnett may have stepped away from Hollywood for a little bit during that
yes,
time.
he very actively stepped away. Yeah,
Yeah, and I understand that. But Guy Ritchie was able to tackle what he was always so good at in a movie like Wrath of Man. And then all of
yeah,
a sudden we noticed him, which was what made it even more exciting seeing him pop up in Oppenheimer as he did.
yes,
Yeah, and
yes.
that was great too.
Yeah, yeah, he had a nice little role in Oppenheimer. I always go back to the 2017 film Oh Lucy. That was the first time I had
Oh
seen him
yeah, I forgot about
in a
that.
movie in years, in a
Yeah.
really,
Okay.
really long time.
Mhm.
And that was exciting. I thought he was quite good in that film. And then he started to take on more mainstream roles, I would say, such as Wrath of Man. He
Mhm.
did another Guy Ritchie film, I believe,
Oh yeah,
last year or a
Operation
couple years
Fortune, I
ago.
think
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was.
Yep, and
Yeah.
then Oppenheimer, as you talked about there. So
Yeah.
great to see him back though in a leading film. Do love me some Josh Hartnett.
Mhm.
We'll talk about him. We'll certainly talk about his performance. It also stars Ariel Donahue, Salika Knight Shyamalan in the
Mhm.
film as well, Allison Pill, Haley Mills, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout, including Kid Cudi, everyone's favorite pop
One of the
star.
strangest cameos I think I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, that was really interesting. That was the one thing that was spoiled for me. I knew that he had some sort of small role that people were salivating over.
It's a meaningless
Once
role.
they,
It means
yeah,
nothing to the movie, but I love that it's here.
yeah. If you're not familiar with Trap, it is about a father and his teen daughter. They attend a pop concert only to realize they've entered the center of a dark and sinister event. All right, Brendan, I'm excited. Let's get into it. What did you think about Trap?
Well, do we want to get into spoilers at some point during this
We
conversation?
can. Yeah, we
Yeah,
can get
maybe not
into
right away.
spoilers at a certain point. Sure.
Yeah, maybe we can lay the groundwork first before we get into some details here, which
Yep.
it's not that I need to get into spoilers. I think it's just going to be a lot of fun to talk about where this film
Yeah.
goes, I
I
think.
mean, it's an M. Night movie, and his
Yeah.
films, as we all know, have various twists and turns that come about. So
Yeah.
I think it's
Even
worth getting into the details a little bit.
yeah, even though I think Trap does sit nicely alongside movies like Knock at the Cabin that they have twists and turns, but they come with a bit of an asterisk as far as how
Mhm.
twisty and how turny that they are.
Mhm.
They're twisty in very different ways, and Trap is another example of that. I love this film, and Shyamalan does continue to take big swings, or should I say, he continues to swing away, pun
Yeah.
intended.
Swing
Uh,
away.
I'm sure I'm
Yes.
not the only one to ever make that joke. It's probably really tired and tried out at this point. I wouldn't say that this here is his swingiest outing as of late, but it might be his most unpredictable and maybe his most deceptive. And what I mean by that is, with films like Glass and Old and Knock at the Cabin, you could tell there was an underlying theme or point to whatever those bold swings were that he was taking. And Trap certainly has some very intriguing ideas on its mind that we'll talk about for sure. But they're ones that you have to look a little harder to try and find, given its exterior, which on the surface can be taken simply as a ridiculously fun thriller. It's in this film
Mhm.
where I really sensed Shyamalan's love for Alfred Hitchcock, because when you look back at some of Hitchcock's lesser films, and when I say lesser, I mean movies that aren't Vertigo or Psycho or Rear Window or Rebecca.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
a lot of his films, especially in the 50s, were really funny, and they had a very twisted
Sure.
sense of humor.
Yeah.
Like movies like To Catch a Thief, Notorious, North by Northwest, especially. Rope,
Mhm.
which was apparently a pretty big inspiration for Shyamalan while making Trap here.
Okay.
These
That
movies
makes
are,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
it does. Like the experimentation of that film, you could certainly see how M. Night was inspired by that experimental idea. to utilize a single location as best as he could. And, we'll talk about that as it relates to Trap going forward in this conversation when we get into some more specifics. But these films from Hitchcock in particular from this time, they were quite hilarious and they were quite illogical as well when you think about it. And Trap feels like it's ripped from a very similar playbook, which we don't see nearly enough of anymore. If you want my opinion on that, I love when we get that kind of throwback in a way that's still sort of weird and twisted and very deliberately breaking rules, which is why this movie, like most of Shyamalan's recent films, are not going to work for everyone. I will not be surprised if people walk away from this saying, I thought that was terrible.
It's been polarizing. Been polarizing.
Shyamalan's been polarizing because his trademarks nowadays are things we would normally criticize other movies for. It's a very interesting thing. Like what is it about M. Night that he gets a pass for some of these things? Is it his conviction? Is it the fact that it is done so purposefully? People talk in this movie like they're from another planet, and but like I sit there and think, why am I enjoying it when Shyamalan does it? And what is the reason for it? And in a movie like Trap, I'll talk about this further, I do think there's a pretty interesting reason as to why people talk so weirdly in this movie. There really is something cooking here that I do think is fascinating. And I think on top of that, just the fact that it's a bloody good time, I think is what makes it all the more interesting. I can't wait to see it again.
Yeah, I have been very much on the record about this. I am with you. I absolutely loved this film. I understand it's been polarized. I understand that maybe some of you listening vehemently disagree, mildly disagree. That is certainly understandable. I loved it. What makes it so compelling to me is that it's this brilliant, absolutely brilliant sleight of hand where it morphs two movies into one. And I don't mean how it's a concert movie in the first half and a home invasion thriller in the back half, although that is certainly an additional layer that makes it even more invigorating. No, I'm talking about how it's simultaneously this goofy, awkward fun fest that completely leans into its silly premise and features an unhinged Josh Hartnett, who is just as hilarious as he is a menacing serial killer. But it's also this incredibly personal film and commentary on M. Night's own fatherhood, trying to wrestle with how you live separate lives without neglecting and harming one of them. I mean, he goes out of his way to cast his real life daughter as a character whose father left her when she was just 7 years old. For as fun and diverting as this film is, it is equally just as sad and cynical. And good Lord, do I think that is sublime here. The thematic tension and nuance at play is really, really fantastic. And I love the parallels in the film as it relates to balance, whether it be work-life balance for Cooper and by extension, M. Night himself, or the film trying to balance its saddening thematic underbelly with its on-the-surface hilarity. Just an insane amount of thought is put into it all, and I found it extremely captivating. I was completely with the film from the beginning all the way through the end.
Oh, you're right.
Mid-credits.
Yeah, you're right about the film's sense of balance, because with this new era of M. Night making these really schlocky thrillers, I feel like his films are getting a little bit more efficient and a little tighter in that tonal balancing act. A movie like Old, for instance, which I love the swings that movie takes, but that is a very tonally messy movie. And that third act just comes out of friggin' nowhere. I'm still not sure what to think about that film's final act, Old specifically. But Trap and Knock at the Cabin are certainly more seamless experiences. And I think he's getting a better knack at trying to craft these types of films as he keeps going, which is expected. I think that's a neat thing to see. And I think that's what makes the film really smooth by comparison, even if it is it's still a very messy film. To call it smooth by M. Night Shyamalan standards is not the normal definition of smooth. But just like I love this idea, and you talked about this as one. I've seen a lot of other people mention this. This is basically a girl dad movie in many
Mhm.
ways.
Mhm.
I think I tweeted that this is basically if Dial M for Murder were about girl dads. It has some similar narrative thresholds with that film as well. But the idea that he decided to make a movie about his desire and sometimes inability to balance his family life with his work life, except here the analogy is work life equals serial killer. Like that
Yeah.
idea is
Crazy.
so Shyamalan. It is absolutely hilarious. And yet, while there is a little bit of a cynicism, or like there is something cynical about it as you're talking about, and yet the movie's kind of sweet. This is what I think is so interesting about the movie as well. We often talk about the idea of nepotism babies, right?
Yeah.
And it's a term that's often frowned upon. Yet for some reason, the way it's portrayed here feels genuinely sincere and kind of sweet, right? Even with M. Night himself having his own cameo here, he's I think he's Lady Raven's uncle or something like that. Yet he may as well have just been playing her father in many ways, despite the whole abandonment narrative thread that you talked about. If we just forget about that for a moment, there's something about the way he's able to deconstruct that idea and create some new interpretation of that idea. And that's what I think is so interesting about this late era of M. Night is he takes pretty bold and daring ideas that are pretty relevant for our times and reinterprets them in his own way.
Yeah.
We talked about that with Knock at the Cabin and the way it portrays our sociopolitical landscape and brings a new perspective to it. He does that with Glass, with the whole conclusion of how superhero movies are now starting to crumble in front of our eyes. Old has 3,000 ideas on its mind. But in the case of Trap, he's taking another idea and offering a new perspective and a new lens on it. And I just love that he's doing that. It makes it. I mean, it makes it sound like I'm saying the movie's way more artful than it actually is. But in a way, it kind of is, even despite the surface level hilarity that makes the film all the more enjoyable. But I love films that can balance that.
I think there is a lot of merit. I think there's a ton of thematic nuance to this film. I think what's interesting with what you're talking about there, and I don't know if I agree with you. I didn't anticipate saying those words, but we might have a little bit of a different read on this film because I don't know if I sensed sweetness as much as I sensed poisonous. I think what's interesting about the analogy is M. Night inserting himself as a serial killer for fun and entertainment. Let's trap a serial killer at this concert. How entertaining will that be? Is that what it is? Or does M. Night see his actions, his fatherhood, as that sinister? I was neglectful.
Well, okay. See, you're talking about a different aspect that I'm not referring to as sweet or tender. The thing that I might be referring to as sweet and tender is the fact that he's going out of his way to basically turn this movie into an advertisement for his daughter's music. And in many ways, it is that. And
I do want to mention that as well.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the sweetness is in the film's maybe inadvertent depiction on what the nepotism baby ultimately is.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about that tenderness, although I don't necessarily disagree, but I still think it falls in line with this poisonous ethos that trickles out into this film. And I think that's what I love about this film as it relates to fatherhood and failure. It's perhaps any parent's worst nightmare, the realization that we might have failed our kids and how that fear could leave you feeling trapped in guilt and regret.
No pun intended.
That idea here is remarkably poignant. And as you're talking about, and we mentioned this earlier, it's one thing that he cast his real life daughter as Lady Raven and created an entire concert film for her to help jumpstart her career as perhaps some sort of remedy for his failings as a father. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it's an additional layer that I just find really fascinating. However, what makes that all the more illuminating, and this is a spoiler, but since we're already here, I need to talk about it. So
Yeah, let's just go ahead and get into spoilers and
Spoiler
talk about where the
alert.
film goes.
what makes that all the more illuminating is that he once again cameos, and he cast himself as the guy who ended up putting Lady Raven in danger by giving her full access to Cooper. That symbolism may not be subtle, but I do find it very powerful. In fact, it makes me extremely heartbroken for M. Night because it suggests that he gave his demons full access to Suleika or all of his daughters. Again, I have no idea what that looks like. And in real life, it might not be nearly as traumatic as that sounds. But at the very least, it exhibits how M. Night feels about his own failures or his inability to separate his lives, whatever those consequences might have been. That, to me, is profoundly moving, and how he makes that so affecting in a movie that is at times very silly and fun and weird. It is really something to watch to see how he interweaves all of that.
Oh, it's I think this is the brilliance of the movie, honestly. Even though we may have a slightly different interpretation on the cynicism versus the sweetness, I think there is a little bit of both happening there.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked a little bit about Knock at the Cabin, how that film concludes in a way that is narratively speaking not open for interpretation, but thematically it very much is. That's a very
it's more
challenging
hopeful.
movie.
Yeah, more hopeful. This is a little bit antithetical in that regard. I think for me, the sweetness, and I do agree that there is a tenderness to what he offers his daughter here as this concert film. I just wonder if that is born out of this poisonous self-reflection.
Well, there is maybe a sense of regret happening in a meta way. And at the same time, I think what makes it so interesting is it's not a one-sided depiction of that regret. Because if it were one-sided, it would seem as if he is seeing this as a very dangerous thing. Yet at the same time, I do get the sense that M. Night is genuinely proud of the work that his daughters are doing this year, whether it be Suleika's music or even his other daughter in the film, The Watchers, which even has a poster in the background at one point in Trap. There's an advertisement.
Of course.
For it
You
here.
got to do that.
Yeah, but like the fact that you could definitely sense that he is truly proud of their work and he wants to promote it. Like he weirdly is able to have it both ways here, I think. And that's where I think both of our readings do maybe have some merit. And weirdly, it's making me like the movie even more as we talk about these very things. That like both can absolutely be true.
No, I completely agree. And as we talk, I think maybe it's less of me disagreeing with you. I think perhaps I was a little too brash.
No. It's not about the brashness. I think it's more so you looking at the yang to my yin, or yin to my yang.
I just wonder if that is born out of that cynicism, I guess, is the question.
It's a great question. It's a good question, I think.
And I do think that maybe it is, given the fact that, again, within the analogy, he inserts a serial killer as himself here.
As a serial killer, yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
and he cast himself as the guy that gives the serial killer full access to his real life daughter playing this pop star. Like that to me, again, I don't find that subtle, but I do find it extremely fascinating psychologically.
It's not subtle, but it also kind of is because it has different rooms for interpretation.
That's true.
It showcases how M. Night himself is somehow both the nicest and meanest man on the planet right now. It's like somehow he has it both ways.
Yeah, and I think, again, what's also fascinating about this film, going back to some of my opening thoughts, is that the film maybe suggests that no matter how hard we try to separate our ambitions from our home life, eventually they will always bleed together. And how that manifests here, sure, it's narratively a little manufactured, but there's still a lot of fun to be had with M. Night's constant zigging and zagging with Cooper's ability to escape entrapment. However, It's not just Cooper's separate lives blurring together. It's also the film's separate identities as well, because its thematic and emotional underbelly gives weight to some of the film's very best scenes. The back and forth between Cooper and Lady Raven and the limo and eventually at Cooper's home is dramatically engrossing, but emotionally, I think of the moment where Cooper reacts to Lady Raven playing the piano and singing this song to Riley. And there's this incredible close up on Cooper as he hears the music. He is clearly wrestling with not just his rage toward Lady Raven, but watching Riley euphorically live her best life in that moment. And he can barely contain his emotion. It is some of the best individual acting I have seen all year. Josh Hartnett is incredible
Well,
in that moment.
yeah.
It is so good.
The other thing I love about Josh Hartnett's performance is something I mentioned earlier. There's usually, not always, but there's usually a reason why characters talk the way they do in M. Night Shyamalan movies. And here, Josh Hartnett seems to be providing that justification as a man that is attempting to mask something that is impossible to mask. And yet somehow his awkwardness is what gets him by. Like, I think that's
Yeah.
what's so interesting. And the way he's able to maneuver around police officers and they literally don't bat an eye at him. It's weirdly due to that awkwardness and the way that he is trying to create this facade. And I think he does that so well, especially in that scene you're talking about. He has to do three things all at once. He has to feel anger. He has to feel fear for trying to hide from this potential discovery for his family, but
Yep.
also he's reacting as a normal dad would in the moment.
Yeah.
He's doing all of those three things, and
All
yet
of that comes through in his performance. It is
Yeah.
truly striking. And I
Yeah.
do want to talk further about Hartnett's performance, but I guess to finish that thought roll fast on the film's balancing act here, which I think is incredible. I also think of Cooper's conversation with his wife Rachel near the end of the film. There is a dramatic bite that keeps you on edge, but underneath, he's a father who is heartbroken that he won't get to watch his kids grow up, which
Yeah.
he voices. Cooper's biggest regret here has absolutely nothing to do with his immorality as a serial killer.
Yeah.
It is his fear that he's lost his kids. And that duality in Hartnett's performance, I think, is also fantastic. So, again, when you couple that with the film's thematic intent as far as M. Night grappling with his own fatherhood and how that couples with the insane silliness of this film, the constant zigging and zagging, all of the fun that we see on the surface, the film's aesthetic and genre sensibilities, that is interwoven with this thematic and emotional gravitas that just should not work. And in the hands of other filmmakers, it probably wouldn't. But he somehow is able to find that balance in a way that truly blew me away. Like, I walked out of this film grinning from ear to ear with how much fun I had, and also feeling this inherent sadness for M. Night that he thinks he might have failed as a father. Like, I don't know how he did that. It is truly incredible how the film made, for me anyway, made that work.
As an allegory for quote unquote releasing parental abuse, yet also just simply making a movie that is not only fun but looks absolutely amazing.
Looks good too.
The
Yeah, it's
cinematography here.
crazy.
I'm gonna try and pronounce the individual's name. Shyumba Makipram. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but this is the one who usually works with Luca Guadagnino, also shot Challengers earlier this year.
Yeah.
And the movie looks incredible. And, it's a movie that also had to capitalize on what felt like a real concert. I know, very much inspired by the Taylor Swift Eras tour in a certain way. And it doesn't quite have the same bigness of, let's say, a Taylor Swift or Beyonce or Rihanna level pop star, but it doesn't necessarily need to. It definitely feels a little bit more contained by comparison, but in a weird way, I think that actually adds to the film in creating more of a claustrophobic vibe as opposed to the vastness and the openness that you get from a massive sports arena where one of those artists would probably perform at. And I love the realism at play and trying to capitalize on all those things too, even to the point that at one point a literal trap door opens up as like, which is one of the dumbest things to do at a concert like that, because that is such a safety hazard.
So ridiculous.
No
way it would just be sitting there.
No, and yet I forgive it because it's an M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's not fair to say that, and yet for some reason I forgive it. I forgive it when.
Do you mind if I go backstage with you to get a box of T-shirts? Surely that would happen, right?
Oh my gosh, one of the best characters of.
We'll talk about him. I don't want to get too distracted yet. Yeah. But I want to absolutely talk about
Jamie.
About Jamie, because it is fascinating. But there's a lot of mechanics here that are so artificial and manufactured. You can see the seams of the plot and how Cooper is forced to react to feeling
none of this makes sense. There's no way this trap would actually happen like this, even though ironically I think it was inspired by somewhat of a true story. I think back in the 80s there was an experiment where I forget what state it was. They invited over 100 potentially suspected serial killers to some type of Super Bowl contest to see if they can actually catch who the person was. And I think that was the basis and inspiration for this idea here. So while it's not the same, it also doesn't forgive the the plot mechanics being what they are. But I love that they're as ridiculous as they are. I love that they don't make sense.
Incredibly stagey, but it's the conviction, it's the fun, it's the commitment to it that I really appreciate. There's a moment where Cooper blatantly shoves a woman down the stairs to distract the police,
and no one saw it happen.
There's 100 people in the hallway. Any number of them could have seen it, and everyone just pretends like nothing ever happened.
But
it's wild.
That's why I think Josh Hartnett's performance is so good at capitalizing on that awkwardness that not most people, but some people still don't really like about M. Night Shyamalan. The way that they speak, the way that they carry themselves, which almost feels kind of alien at times. Yet I think about it in this way. If I were to experience or run into someone in real life who behaved that way, my first thought would be, okay, sure, I just want you to get away from me. So in a way, like that awkwardness, and I don't know if that was M. Night's intent or not, that awkwardness is kind of what saves Cooper in more ways than one.
Yeah, well, I do think there is purpose to it. You're right that he gives off this creepy, awkward vibe that is heightened for entertainment's sake, but it's also indicative of how panicky he feels. And he is desperate for answers. He barely pays attention to the concert. He's constantly on the lookout, and I think Hartnett does a great job of writing that line impeccably. Again, the themes of balance in this film, because when Cooper finds himself in control, that hamminess in Hartnett's performance, it does dissipate. It does disappear, and you see Cooper transform into what seemingly is almost a completely different character. And in those moments, he does come off much more menacing.
Yeah.
And again, that's a duality in the performance I think is really great, especially when you couple it with what we see throughout the film. As we've been talking about, he clearly is a loving father. He does care about Riley.
You believe
he
that.
wants
You
her
sense
to have
that.
this incredible moment. And I also think of moments in the film such as, and this is as things are falling apart. Lady Raven has been able to manage a few things, and reveals are coming to light that has his family, distraught.
Yeah.
And yet, even as things are falling apart, he's telling Riley everything will be okay at school with the girls. he
Yeah.
tells his son Spencer to finish his science project.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he cares about his kids more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this film wrestles with. I kind of love that while we do hear some facts about the butcher, the film
Yeah.
never really wrestles with Cooper being a serial killer. We just
Well-
immediately buy in that he's a guy capable
Well,
of those things. Part of what
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
that work is the ingenuity of the character and how we see that he knows what he's doing. Again, even if it's contrived for movie's sake. But I love how the film commits to that and commits to what this film really is at its core. And it's not about a serial killer and the psychology of why someone would commit those acts. We've had a million of those. We just watched Longlegs a few months ago. This is about a serial killer who happens to be
A dad.
loving husband and a dad who really adores his family. And when those things come apart at the end, that's what unglues him. It's not killing people that unglues him.
It's the lack
idea
of
of losing his kids.
Well, it's that and the routine being broken, which I think also plays maybe into some of his OCD like tendencies, which is where I think the psychology of Cooper is maybe at it. I think that's where it's maybe at its most interesting in looking at his mannerisms. What did you think about getting a little bit of, I don't want to say backstory, but we get a few glimpses of Cooper's life as a child and what may have led to some of his instincts as a monstrous presence, because like it's there where I feel like the movie would have potentially given us that psychology that it also chooses not to give us. But then does that render some of those moments meaningless? Is there actually a purpose to that outside of maybe just simply creating a parallel to the idea of bad parenting outside of just that normal idea?
Yeah, I think there is certainly a little bit of generational trauma at play. I do love that M. Night keeps that psychology very limited here.
Yeah, it's so basic.
It's very basic. It might explain some of his psychopathic tendencies, but the film does not get bogged down in that. And I really do appreciate that. It's a simple tool to perhaps explain why he is this serial killer. But the character that we come to know throughout the film isn't someone who's as concerned with who he is outside of the home as much as he is this man who is succumbing to his worst nightmare in that he's losing his family.
Yeah. So there is a parallel there in a way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I will say, if there is any justification I may have for some of those, they're not really flashbacks. They're almost more like hallucinatory moments that Cooper has, imagining his mother, who is perhaps the subject of his. I don't want to say abuse, because there's really no definition as to what and why.
Yeah. I mean, it suggests that.
Well,
but we don't really know. Again, I love that it's limited. It's kind of vague.
One thing that we do get, and this is what the Haley Mills character, first off, I love that she's in this movie after also being in a movie called The Parent Trap in the 1960s. So, of course, she has to be here. I love that little tie. She does get a little monologue that may have explained, I don't want to say too much, but it does go into some of those potential details on what it would be like if a parent did recognize that their child was troubled and perhaps monstrous. And I think it raises a pretty interesting question. What if that parent didn't do anything about it? What if they didn't know what to do about that? What are the ramifications of that? I think that's at least a pretty intriguing question to ponder over, because I think that's what the film is maybe suggesting, is Cooper didn't get the attention he deserved from that figure. And maybe that, but again, like the fact that it is so limited and so basic as we're talking about, I think allows us to infer a few additional things about it, which is, I think, what Shyamalan wants out of this movie. I think he wants us to talk about it in this way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that notion. There's just not enough here for me to mine too much out of it, other than it suggests, again, that Cooper probably did not get the kind of parenting he needed when he was a child, whatever
Sure.
that looked like.
Yeah, could look
But
like anything.
as a result, he was not going to make that same mistake. The distance, the gap, the void left behind by his own mother, he was not going to have with his own kids. I think that's the intent of having the mother character in this film, is to create that irony, or to, I guess, suggest that's why he loves his kids as deeply as he does. And you couple that with everything we've been talking about in terms of the film exploring how we in our own lives try to separate our ambitions from our home life. The idea that eventually those things bleed together. There's no way for you to completely keep those things separate. I do think that is an intentional through line in this film that perhaps adds some nuance to those ideas.
Perhaps,
But I do love that where it counts the most as it relates to Cooper and his fatherhood and what that might say for M. Night himself. I think the film is excruciatingly nuanced in that. The thematic tension of this film is incredible. I absolutely love it. But like, little things like what you're talking about there, it does add little layers to this that just kind of compound for me over the course of the film.
It adds to the conversation, even if it might be a little bit disconnected from the overarching conversation. I like that Shyamalan is willing to have multiple conversations simultaneously, even if they are maybe only slightly tied to each other. He's not interested in through lining everything, which I kind of appreciate in a way. What did you think of Suleika Shyamalan's performance here?
I think she's very good. And here's another aspect to the film that I don't see a whole lot of people talking about, but it was top of mind for me when walking out of the film, as is the case with everyone else. I certainly gravitated toward the M. Night, am I a bad parent idea that this film is very much evoking. However, I do think this film also acts as a fascinating commentary on celebrity. She is this Taylor Swift level pop star, and yet she humbles herself to not only help Riley, but save this other man from becoming Cooper's next victim. In a world where celebrities often feel disconnected from the real world, utterly disassociated, I found that fascinating, and I don't think that was accidental. I think he wanted to say something about celebrity, high-level celebrity, and how that can be used in a different way than what it typically is. Again, similarly to what you were just talking about with Cooper's mother, it doesn't overtake the film's central thesis, but it's there enough that I did find it compelling.
But it's a very Shyamalan thing to do it that way, because it's kind of a deconstruction of what we typically associate celebrity with, right?
Yes.
It shows a different lens, and it also, in conjunction with that, shows a different point of view with regard to social media and how powerful of a tool it can be in a good way.
In a good way, yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting. I think Suleika is good here as well, primarily because when it gets to that home invasion thriller in the back half, which in many ways is kind of the big twist of the movie, is just not knowing where it was going to go narratively when we leave the concert. The fact that we actually leave the concert halfway through the movie is kind of the biggest surprise here. And I wouldn't say Suleika is magnificent in her performance, but I was at least I was compelled the entire time. I was interested where it was going, which is all it needs to do, all her performance needs to do. And I think she's at least able to carry it, which is all it needs.
I would say she is magnificent as a musician, as the pop star.
That's what I was going to ask you
at the concert are incredible. Like I did love that. I'm not I don't listen to that type of music as much. Yeah, it's utterly convincing. I think she's fantastic as far as creating a magnetism and an aura that would rival someone like a Taylor Swift. Like, I understand why everyone in that concert was losing their minds.
Sure.
and would love her as a musician, as a stage presence. I think she was fantastic. Now, when she is forced to dramatically act against Josh Hartnett, that's not her biggest strength, but I don't think that it detracts from the movie all that much either.
No,
I do
don't-
like the
it's
back
not
and forth
terrible.
between those characters, as I mentioned earlier. And again, with how she is the nucleus for the film's commentary on celebrity, she brings a tenderness and a dolefulness to it that I do appreciate. So I think she's
Yeah,
more than
and-
gratifying enough here.
Yeah, and admittedly, I'm not really the target audience for her music, and these were her own songs as well. So it is a showcase for her own music.
Yeah. Mhm.
I will say, based on what I hear, a lot of pop music doing these days, and female-driven pop music is very popular nowadays. It's a very competitive market. I will say, I think her music is comparatively, I think it's good. I mean, I don't know if it's quite inventive enough to stand above, let's say, like Beyonce and the Renaissance tour. It's not quite at that level. Or even recently, someone like Charlie XCX and her album Brat, which is all over everyone's radar nowadays. It's not quite at that level, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, which is why I kind of like that the arena that she's playing at almost feels a little bit smaller than what we'd see some of these artists playing at nowadays. The film technically takes place in Philadelphia, but most of it was not shot there. I think there was one establishing shot early on when they parked their car that looks like it may have been shot in Fishtown. But I think most of this was shot in Canada, and the arena that they shoot at is considerably smaller than most of the Philadelphia venues where a lot of these big pop stars would play at, whether it be the Wells Fargo Center or Citizens Bank Park or Lincoln Financial Field.
Sure.
Taylor Swift would play at either. I think she actually played at Citizens Bank Park when she did her Eras tour, if I'm not mistaken. But it's the kind of place that a Billy Joel would perform, that or a Taylor Swift or a Rolling Stones or Pearl Jam. It's where you need that kind of capacity. But this feels a little bit more contained, which I think actually matches the musical vibe that Salika's going for here. I actually feel like this would have been her audience for that. So I at least believe that in that sense too.
Yeah, the concert scenes were shot at the First Ontario Center
Okay.
in Ontario, Canada. It has a capacity of 19,000.
Okay.
So it is perfect for junior hockey in Canada, which is probably what it's used for.
It did look like that, yeah.
You're right. It is considerably smaller than these large arenas that a Taylor Swift would be at. But again, I found those sequences on their own terms more than convincing.
I did too. If anything, what I'm commenting on is like, if her music was way better, and if I thought it was at the level of someone like a Beyonce, then I would think shooting at this level arena would be weird.
It would.
I feel like then it would be bigger.
Yeah.
I feel like it actually matches her audience.
I mean, it would have just been another one of those things you have to buy into, because it's not as if this film is acting in some sort of normal reality anyway. It's certainly not.
This takes place on Mars.
Yeah, like I can't say on one hand, what they're saying is goofy. That's not how people talk. He goes into the back room with Jamie, and then on the other hand go, I don't know if a pop star would sing at this building. Like, I don't think you can talk about this film in that way.
No, there's no practicality here. It's a movie that is meant to be self-aware and how illogical and impractical that it is. I mean, it's a really
what
funny
you're
movie.
saying, like. Sorry to butt in real fast, but I think ironically what you're saying could actually be lofted as a criticism here, because it's the one thing of the film that is born in reality.
It's ironic. Yeah, you make a great point. It's like the music and the actual audience size and the capacity makes sense for this music, so it actually makes too much sense in a movie like this.
Exactly.
I don't want this movie to make sense. I don't want this movie to make sense. I want to get more scenes of that one girl that Riley goes to school with that yells at her mom when she sees that Riley was on stage.
Sees her
it's
on
one of the
stage.
funniest things I've seen all year. That is one of the funniest
gosh.
reaction shots I've ever seen.
I hate you, Mom. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about Jamie real fast.
Oh, okay.
Let's talk about him.
Jonathan Langdon
has to be one of the best characters of the year. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
It's
And
yeah.
again, like I love the reverse shot because it is completely unconventional because of how it's framed, right? They're talking directly into the camera to the audience. So it's framed so differently than how those conversations typically take place. And perhaps that enhances the secrecy of it, the I shouldn't be telling you this vibe.
but I'm going to anyway because I weirdly trust you.
Even though you're this complete stranger, again, it's so ridiculous and absurd.
But he's so proud of it. He's so proud of it.
He
like,
is.
It's like I get the sense that this is a man that has never been involved with something like this before. And Shyamalan also goes out of his way to suggest that Jamie is kind of a secret fan of the Butcher, this killer. He's very intrigued by him. So the fact that he's sort of partaking in this trap, he gets so overly excited about it.
He gets caught up in the fun. But that's the thing, and that's where the believability, if you want to, bring in that term, that's where I do buy into it a little bit because this isn't a normal concert. They are very aware that this is a setup. And if you're aware of who the Butcher is, if you pay attention to that stuff as Jamie proclaims in this film, of course he's going to be excited. And the moment that someone comes up to him and wants to talk about that, he's going to take a second out of his time to indulge. Anyone would in that moment. I did buy that. As silly as it is.
I did too.
I think it's convincing. Where things get a little out of bounds is when he invites Cooper to the back to go get the t-shirts. That's a little that's what the film is.
Literally gives him a box cutter.
Yeah. And everyone's like, oh, that's it for Jamie. He's all done.
I mean, it's there to play with expectation, which I appreciate.
It's fun. It's a great moment. I loved it. Yeah.
It's the creation of that character. It's almost like M. Night Shyamalan was sitting back at home, decided to watch a movie, and that movie was Get Out. And he thought, what if TSA didn't handle shit?
I need to get out. Yeah. That's the character I need in this film. And it's serviceable in a similar kind of way. It doesn't quite reach the heights of Lil Rel Howery in that film, but it's still very good.
Similar. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's because Jamie's underutilized comparatively. He has a much smaller role.
Rightfully so. Any more of that character, it could have been a problem.
I agree.
Although
Lil Rel Howery's character in Get Out, he was a pivotal aspect to that film.
Yeah.
Jamie needed to be limited. I agree. But when he's on screen, gold, just absolutely pure gold.
Oh, great stinger at the end too. That's
great,
all I'll say.
Yeah. Again, and that circles back to a conversation we had not too long ago either, as far as end credits go and utilizing them effectively. Like, I'm perfectly okay if more movies want to do this. Let's have a mid-credit scene, end credit scene, whatever it may be, but keep it to what the film is, have some fun with it, make it make sense, and this one very much does. I think it does. More than warranted.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily have to be a joke, but they, add a little add a little cherry on top that's not necessary. You don't need to eat
cherry.
That.
Exactly.
Yeah, just a little cherry.
Absolutely.
I love Jamie. I love this movie. I love this movie.
It's so good. I do want to quickly note, I didn't talk about it as much because I wanted to talk about Cooper and the thematic heft of this film and how M. Night fosters his own fatherhood in this film through its allegories here. And I want to echo something you said earlier as far as the craft of this film. The cinematography is really good. It is well shot. I love the camera work here. The performances are very good. I do think this cast does a great job of honing in on that M. Night dialogue and having fun, especially Josh Hartnett, who, to your point earlier, is having to often do 3 or 4 things simultaneously. And I think the hamminess of that character early on, as heightened as it is at times, and oh boy, does it go over the top.
It does. But, it knowingly does. It's
exactly.
It's not too far off from maybe what Christian Bale was doing in American Psycho. It's got a bit of a Patrick
Yeah.
Bateman kind of self-awareness. And I've seen other people make that comparison too.
But I do think there is a purpose to it, as I noted earlier. This is a character that is starting to feel trapped. He knows that he's closed in. There's all of this security around. He is panicking a little bit. And as a result, he's feeling uncomfortable. He's not himself. And you're going to become someone that you're not.
Yeah.
And that manifests itself as Cooper going, I'm going to talk like this.
Oh, like,
it's so wild.
They sometimes talk like video game characters. Right?
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. But
so weird.
But here's the thing, in contrast, and I think this is where the conversation, at least on social media, can get lost a little bit, because when Cooper feels like he's in control, you get a very different performance from Josh Hartnett. Very different, like Cooper becomes a different character the moment he feels like he's in control.
Yeah.
And I
That's
think
true. That's very true.
That is very important to highlight as it relates to the film's tone and his performance specifically. And of course it leads to a lot of that emotional and dramatic bite that we get in the back half of the film. That's really great. So
yeah. What did you think of Alison Pill before we get to our, I guess, updated personal rankings of M. Night here?
I liked her, especially because, like, when we first meet her, she does a great job of hiding how much the character actually knows and how much she's involved.
Interesting. Okay.
I never really sensed that she was going to become a significant part of this film, because so much of the dramatic bite at that time was Lady Raven and Cooper in the back and forth. How is Lady Raven going to get out of this? What is Cooper going to do? Is he going to kidnap her? What is going to take place here? And you get that moment at the piano, as we mentioned earlier, and all of the nuances there in Josh Hartnett's performance that I really like. Most of Rachel in that moment was in the background. She has a few lines of dialogue that come and go without any sort of warning or notice. And then once the family starts to panic, she panics as anyone else would in that moment. So there wasn't too much to really buy into there, at least I don't think, until you get to that final scene when she starts to reveal how much she knew. And I think there's a lot to chew on there in terms of,
I think that scene's
the
great.
emotional nuance, the thematic nuance of this film. Yeah, I think there's a lot there that's really fantastic, and she's very good there.
Well, this is where I'm really interested in seeing the film again, especially knowing where it goes in that final act.
Oh yeah, reveal. This is going to be a fun rewatch for sure. Well,
especially with regard to Rachel and Alison Pill's performance, because I think back on those scenes at the home where she doesn't have much to say and is really presenting herself as just simply a loving mother. Yet maybe it's because I have that new context of what she actually does in the third act. I look back on her performance there and I think, she acted kind of strange too, didn't she? And
maybe she did. And you just don't notice it because you're not anticipating much later on.
Yeah, but now has the performance shifted when you know what that character is also hiding?
Exactly.
Because now I look back on her performance and I think, she was acting a little weird too, wasn't she? And maybe there was a purpose to that. So
it's a little bit of that Amy Adams Arrival thing where you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things going on here. You rewatch it and you're like, your mind is blown by what she's having to do. I think this will be a little bit of that. I'll be curious to revisit those scenes as well, knowing where it goes in the end and how much Rachel is actually involved.
I think I'll weirdly latch on to Pill's performance even more on that rewatch because I may notice things, but I think it's weird. I think I may notice things that I'm now perceiving to be there that may have not necessarily been there at all, and that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah,
it's in a way, it's almost like it's making us play the same game that these characters are. It's a really M. Night, you rock. I love M. Night.
So good. I also just want to shout out Ariel Donahue as well.
Oh, she's great. She's great.
Very good, very convincing as the young teenager who is going to lose her mind and scream her head off at this concert. Don't know too much about her. I've never really seen her before, but she's very good. Very good in this film as well. I don't know if I have any other final thoughts.
I don't think so either.
Pretty thoroughly.
I think so. One thing I will say, if I don't want to call it a criticism, because one thing I do like about the second half is the not knowing of where things were going. I will say there are maybe a few moments where it might spin its wheels a little bit too much before it gets to that final act with Josh Hartnett and Allison Pill.
Yeah.
There's a
the
moment,
constant having to escape and
yeah.
Go?
There is a bit of wash, rinse, repeat happening there, especially when Cooper is now secretly driving the limo and then gets stuck in a giant traffic jam. Like, there are moments where I think, okay, maybe it's repeating itself a little bit.
Yeah.
Even though, admittedly, in the moment, I was still riveted. I was never bored by it.
And that's the thing. Like, I don't mind it as well because, well, really for two things. One, it's the fun that it's having.
Yeah.
And, like the idea that he is driving this limo, as you're talking about, he gets stopped in this crowded street and everyone is surrounding and the police show up. And then there's a cut to him in the crowd. Yeah. How on earth? Again, it's one of those, like, how does nobody notice this? Like, he would have to open the door and get out.
As much as I criticize that scene a little bit for just simply having a bit of a wash, rinse, repeat kind of factor to it, I love the fact that he just ends up in the crowd and there's no explanation. Like, that's the thing I do love.
Stupid. Yeah, like, I love the ridiculousness of it. And perhaps that's why the redundancy didn't bother me too much, because the film is having a lot of fun and I was riveted with it as well. And it also does reverberate that he is not someone to be messed with, that he is good at being this serial killer. Like, he knows his escapes. He knows how to get out of this. He is robust as a character in that regard. So I think it does a great job of doing both of those things simultaneously. So I wasn't too bothered by it, but I do understand what you're saying there. I can't get over the insanity of the mechanics there. It's ridiculous. But I love it. I love that it's absurd. As far as a final thought for me, the one other moment I want to touch on here real quickly is that moment near the end of the film where Cooper is handcuffed and Riley runs up to him and gives him this really affectionate hug as she is sobbing and, deteriorating from all of this uncertainty that is surrounding her. And again, I just find it to be this striking moment symbolically that again speaks to how M. Night might have felt, how he sees himself and his fatherhood as maybe being handcuffed. Yeah. Yet his daughters loved him anyway. Clearly, that is the case given what we've seen with them this year. So, like, I just love the allegorical angles of this film. I do too.
Like I do too. And I love, this might sound like a backhanded compliment, but I love that in order to portray that metaphorical thing there at the end that you're talking about, M. Night once again deliberately sidesteps any logical reasoning that any character, because there's no way the FBI would let that girl hug a potential, not even a potential, an arrested serial killer, even if it was her dad. There's no way. Yeah. Yet, in order for that to happen, it allows M. Night to get the reaction that he wants.
To get it,
yeah. And I love that he's willing to break the rules to do. He's weirdly, he's kind of like a jazz artist, even though he's more accessible than jazz music. But he's willing to bend the rules for his own need, and I really appreciate that.
Or similarly, we're gonna let you pick up this bike, and no one's going to pay attention as you do this. No one is watching you grab one of the spikes from the wheel. Like, it's just so. I love it. So, like, I love that stuff in M. Night. It just,
I want to see
it. And you are right when you talk about it in those terms. You do feel hypocritical because we often criticize and have criticized so many films for being thoughtless in a similar way. Yet somehow M. Night gets a pass, and the reasons why are X, Y, and Z. For all the reasons we've talked about, but like there is something about the conviction
Yeah.
The way he leans into it. It's his personality. Maybe it'd be one thing if it was a one-off. If this was the only film, like if Spielberg made this movie, you'd go like, "Whoa, this was terrible for Spielberg." But this is
him,
M. Night. Like this is who he is. This is
part of his trademark.
ethos.
He's willing to bend the logic to get what he wants, and it's amazing that he's basically proving this point of what you can do visually to convey a different type of visual language in film than we're used to, because he doesn't care about the conventional rules of telling a story, and I think that's what gives him that pass. It's not just that conviction; it's the fact that we can uncover a certain point to those illogical choices. It's not like he's trying to cut corners like other filmmakers might. And I think that's where it becomes problematic when other filmmakers might do something similar, but it doesn't have that underlying point to it. With Shyamalan, he makes us want to have that conversation. I don't know what it is.
That's the big difference. I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. Where M. Night thrives as a filmmaker is that while he does bear responsibilities in terms of how messy these films can be, what distinguishes him aside from the craft, because they are well shot, well crafted, well performed, is that he does bring some sort of emotional or thematic heftiness to these films. It's so much of what I loved about Knock at the Cabin last year. I'm not going to sit here and champion that film as the best film ever made or the best film of last year, especially of its kind. But there is a heftiness to that film that does take it to a new stratosphere for me comparatively to other filmmakers that would make that exact same movie.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of there's a version of this movie that just goes straight to Netflix, and it really is one of the worst films of the year. But he is able to take this material, hone it to his own sensibilities, but he does bring a thematic tension that those other filmmakers most likely wouldn't care to divulge or explore at all.
No.
And that does make him different.
That's the thing. You could sense that even when he's making an illogical decision, he's doing it because he has something else on his mind. And somehow he's able to convey that without telling you that he has something on his mind. And I think that's the big difference there too.
Absolutely. A daughter approaching a handcuffed serial killer would not happen.
Right.
But he needs that to happen for the emotional and thematic symbolism that this film is going for. And he goes for it. And other filmmakers would just leave that out, would cut that out, never include it at all. Whatever the case may be. But that is the difference. And I love that about him.
This is one of my favorite films of the year. It really is.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I have no idea where it ranks for me in terms of the year goes so far, but I adored every second of it. Where do you have this ranked in your personal filmography?
Yeah, so of the 15 films I've seen from Shyamalan, I know he has technically directed 16 films, that one that I haven't seen being his first film, Praying with Anger. I have Trap currently at number 6. My top 5 right now being Signs, The Sixth Sense, The Village, Unbreakable, and number 5 being Knock at the Cabin. Now, in a way, I almost feel like this could be a 5A and 5B at this point. I weirdly admire the audaciousness of movies like Old and Glass. I think I might appreciate the craft of those films more, just given how swingy his direction is. He's going for something with those movies, and it often does not land, and I kind of like that it does not land. But with Knock at the Cabin and Trap, I feel like these are more refined versions of that boldness. And I think as a result, they are better films for it, even though they still have really bold things on their respective minds. I think between the two, I think Knock at the Cabin is a more artful film, and I think I appreciate more. I appreciate it more given its thematic boldness.
Yeah, totally.
But
agree.
I think I'm going to rewatch Trap more than Knock at the Cabin.
Okay.
I think it has
That's
that rewatchability factor for me.
Yeah, feel the same about really his last three films in that like I could watch Knock at the Cabin, Trap, Old at any given moment.
Yeah.
I think all of those have the same rewatchability factor for me. I will say though, looking back at this list and considering the conversation we had on the main show this last week,
Yeah.
I think I am to what we've said a couple of different times between the main show and even this episode. Our ordering of these films can change at any given moment. And I am reconsidering The Sixth Sense a little bit more. It is really hard to deny the prowess of that film. It truly is.
It's so good.
Fantastic. So I think definitively here on the show, I'm going to make the call.
Oh, you're changing it
for everybody. I think I'm going to change it. I'm still sticking with Signs at 1, The Village at 2, Unbreakable at 3, but I will jump The Sixth Sense to 4. I think those are his best 4 films. And I even did say that on the main show. As much as I love Knock at the Cabin and Old, The Sixth Sense was a better movie. I just subjectively have really loved those films. But yeah, I'd say those are his 4 best. And then I would have Knock at the Cabin at 5, Trap at 6, and then Old at 7. I think is where I lean. But those 7 movies I really love for various reasons. But I love those 7 movies.
As time goes on, and every time we see a new M. Night film come out, I like some of these more recent films of his even more. And that's why I'm so interested to go back and rewatch Old and especially Split. I mentioned on the main show that Split I really only saw maybe 1.5 times. I need to see it again in totality to see how well it holds up for me. But in a way, I think Split might be my my least favorite of this new resurgence of M. Night. But I think that could change on a rewatch. I still think it's a very good and very interesting movie. But I like seeing this refinement of that style with movies like Knock at the Cabin and Trap. I can't wait to see what he does next. He might have another film come out next year. I think he already said that he has like 4 ideas that he's toying with, and one of them he's already starting to write. So I love that the man just can't stop working. I love that.
He can't. No, he's the best, and I'm excited to see what he has up his sleeve next. But especially after Trap, like. I have no idea where this is going to rank for me as far as 2024 is concerned. But on its own terms, I really adored it. Like these last 3 movies, as much as I enjoyed Split in 2016, The Visit was a great resurgence for him in 2015. I didn't love Glass as much, but these last 3, Old, Knock at the Cabin, and Trap, I'd say M. Night is fully back in a big way. And I can't wait to see what he does next. I hope it's a sequel to The Village.
You know, he probably has some secret idea like that up his sleeve where he concocts a new secret trilogy out of nowhere, right?
Probably, yeah.
I mean, for all we know, maybe Trap is actually set in the Unbreakable universe. There was a
Who
moment.
knows? It's very possible.
There was a moment where he was getting tased, he being Josh Hartnett.
Yeah.
That almost looked literally monstrous, as if he was churning some type of superpower or something.
Yeah. Sure.
So who knows? Maybe M. Night has something up his sleeve like that. I wouldn't put it past him.
I wouldn't put it past him either. Either way, he's a filmmaker I find utterly fascinating, and I can't wait to see what he does next. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, please leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media. You can always email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. You can reach out to us on Letterboxd as well. Just search In Session Film. You'll find us on all of those platforms. And I guess just to reiterate, episode 596, we did a consensus M. Night Shyamalan ranking, and it was a really great time. So I urge people to go and check out the main show this week as well. Brendan, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I just can't wait to see Trap again. I told my parents to go see it. I don't think they'll like it. They tend to look more for narrative logic than anything else, but I want to see the reactions because we know quite a few people that haven't gone for this movie. and some of them are even already kind of on M. Night's recent wavelength. Like, they've liked some of his films, and even some of them haven't responded to Trap. I love that we're getting a commercial film like this that cost, what, $30 million and is sparking this type of response. I love when this happens. I really do.
I do as well. The one thing I'm also curious about is, does this do anything for Josh Hartnett's career? I don't know. I don't know if
either.
he even wants to indulge in Hollywood.
That's up to him.
He's talked about how he's friends with M. Night Shyamalan. They had a great conversation about what this film could be, and M. Night felt as if Josh Hartnett was right for this particular role, and he's really great in the film.
Yeah.
And the more I think about it, the more I consider how often he's doing so many things simultaneously. As far as that awkwardness, the anger that he feels, the genuine affection he feels for his daughter.
Yeah.
I mean, that piano scene, I truly think, is one of the best moments of acting I've seen all year. It's really great.
It's really layered, surprisingly layered.
So layered.
Yeah.
Is Josh Hartnett going to have some sort of renaissance? I don't really know. Like, knowing Josh Hartnett and how he feels about Hollywood and the system, at least with how he decided to leave at a certain point, I don't know if he wants fame and notoriety. That's just not his MO.
Yeah, maybe that's why renaissance might not be the right word to apply to him. Maybe it might be more of a comeback, maybe.
A comeback,
his own comeback, like one that he actually gravitated towards himself.
Yeah, that he gets to pick and choose. I guess that's ultimately what I'm trying to say, or what I'd like to see, is that it gives him more opportunities, and that we're able to see him more in the projects that he wants to be involved with.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would love that. I want to see him in more mainstream stuff.
Yeah.
He was very good in Oppenheimer. Loved seeing him there. Great in Trap. Hopefully we get more later on.
Yeah.
At any rate,
good movie.
With all of that said, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. M. Night simply rules. That's it. Full stop.
It's a trap.